Hello guys, and welcome back to Founder Talk from Temi, an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. As you can see, guys, we've got a new guest with us today, Daan Moreels. Daan, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Likewise, thanks for the invitation.
So Daan, let's just introduce you and your companies to our listeners here. As I said, our listeners arise they're from C-level executive, other leaders in the industry, IT industry mainly, and people aspiring to become founders of their own startup. So tell us a little bit, let's start with you, a little bit about yourself. What do people not know about you? What is one interesting fact which not a lot of people know, which explains who Daan is?
So nice to meet you all. An interesting fact about me that people don't know or probably don't know is I'm an electrical engineer by training, went into sales, and then at a certain point in my life I became a bit bored in the corporate world basically, and I started with photography. So I have been active a few years in the fashion photography, where I worked also for some brands and some magazines. And that was really a huge passion of me, still is, but as you know, I've been more active into the startup world over the last 10 years. So it's still a passion which I would like to pick up again when possible, as soon as possible. But I have been active like 10 years. There's still a website that you can check out, daanmoreelsphotography.com or something. So there the material is still there, but it has been like 10 years since I have been working on that.
That's really cool. I cannot ever understand. I take the worst photos. I don't know why I see something and I think, I take a photo and I show it to my friends and they just laugh because it is the worst photo that can happen. So I think it's definitely a skill, or just a skill I have not got. So.
Well, it's a skill that you can use if you have kids, for instance, and you know how to photograph them the right way, or you travel a lot. It's a skill that you can take with you your whole life and post better pictures your whole life, basically. So it makes sense to invest a bit of time into photographing a bit better, because you can use it for the rest of your life, basically.
Absolutely.
So that's my suggestion to you, if you're interested in it.
I will try. I think in this digital world that we're living in now is extremely important. Tell me, let's speak a little bit about, I'm sorry if I can't pronounce it right, Traxel. Yeah, am I pronouncing your company right? Traxel.
Yeah, Traxel is one of the subsidiaries of Marmax. Marmax is the mother company that we started in 2015. It is what they call a deep tech company. So it's based on a lot of research, initially from the University of Ghent here in Belgium, where they have been working working on the technology, more like the theoretic part of it, since 2010. So Marmax has two daughter companies, Traxel, which is focusing on automotive, and the other one is Axel Propulsion, which is focusing on aerospace. So these are quite challenging markets, to be honest. And we are using in both companies the same base technology, which is called Axel Flux, which is a new kind of motor technology, which is already known for a long time, but it was not so easy to make it work and also to prepare it for mass production. And that's, of course, what we have been working on over the last 10 years. And every one of these companies is focusing or developing the technology with focus on that particular market. So that's in a nutshell.
Tell me, Dan, a little bit more about Magnex. So it started around 7 years ago, I believe. Yeah, founded around
2015, indeed. Yeah.
And tell me a little bit more about the beginning. Where did this idea come from? You were saying that you were doing photography just a little bit before that. That's a huge jump and a huge switch into a different film. Where did this passion come from? And then the idea of Magnex?
Yeah, so the idea is not mine. So I had a startup before this startup, which was active in cloud computing. So I was also a co-founder there, which also evolved into a tech startup with fundraising and so on, which I left in 2016. So I sold a part of my shares. And then I was ready for a new project. And at the school gate, basically, there was a man standing next to me, Peter, And I asked him, okay, what are you doing? What's your job? And he said, yeah, I'm building a new kind of electric motor in my garage. So I thought, okay, so it'll be something, let's check it out. Might be interesting. So I visited him in his garage, and I immediately saw, okay, the guy knows what he's talking about. He has been doing quite some research already around this new technology. The prototype was a quite big one for a wind turbine application. It didn't work yet, but I felt that, yeah, this could be something. I did a bit of my own due diligence, contacted the University of Kent, which was at that time also researching that technology. And then we decided, okay, let's work together. I'm more specialized in the business part of building a startup. You are a technology builder. And then not much later also invited the third co-founder into the company, who was more focusing on the financial and the legal parts of the company. And that's basically how the founding team was composed in the beginning years. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, tell me a little bit more about those beginning years. What did the original MVP look like all the way back then? How did it look?
This is a deep tech company, so it means you build a lot of prototypes to get to phase that you have an impression, okay, it's kind of working. So there are quite some MVPs in the beginning. So the first steps are more like academic prototypes, which we have built together with the university. So there was a smaller motor that was completely not ready for production or something, but just kind of worked. And that was a smaller prototype that we then also used as the base for the future or the further development of the automotive motors. And the other prototype was the one that Peter, my co-founder, was building in his garage, which was a big version of the axial flux generator. These were, you could say, indeed early stage prototypes. Then when the startup grew a bit, we moved on with more mature prototypes. And then in a later stage, you get into more like what we call the sample stage, where you build samples. And also in that phase, you prepare them for mass production, meaning every building step, you have to be sure that it can be done via standardized and potentially also automated production processes. But that's years later, of course. But in the very beginning, you're very much focused on the technology part. Can we make it work? Will it perform? Can we get to a certain performance? Because if you are building technology, you also want it that it's potentially better than the current technology, the conventional technology, of course. So there were some early stage simulations done that the potential of this new motor technology is delivering 2 times, 3 times more power for the same weight. But you have to prove that, of course, you have to validate it. So in the early stages, we built a number of prototypes, many actually, and step by step, they became better and better. And at a certain point, we saw, okay, this prototype is actually delivering 2-3 times more power for the same weight when we compare it with, for instance, a motor that's in a VW electric car or in a Tesla or something. But that's a long process. It is hardware. Hardware is hard. It's quite different compared to software. In software, you can develop an app. You can already send it out to early stage customers, early adopters, and together with the customers, you can sometimes further fine-tune the app or the software. In hardware, you don't do that. You have to validate, you have to buy materials, there is supply chain, you have to make sure that's safe before you test it. You need to have at least a few processes that guarantee quality and safety before you hand it over to a customer, of course.
How do you remain motivated and confident that you're on the right track? This takes a couple of years to actually build something that you can finally start, using, being proud of. How do you maintain that motivation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. To be honest, in the beginning years, you believe that everything will go much faster than it actually is. If I see it now, it's probably 3 times less slower than we initially expected. So that's one thing. So you believe, okay, next year we will have a prototype ready, which we can put in a car. Of course, you keep on working on it. So you keep motivated because you see the positive in it. You see progress, of course. it doesn't go that fast as you expect, but at least every month you move closer to the goal, and that keeps you motivated, of course. There is always progress in not only on the product or technology part, but also on the part of the startup. There are new people entering the company every month. It grows pretty fast. Especially as a co-founder, you wear many hats in the beginning. So if new people enter the company, you can give them responsibilities. You also start to manage the company more and more. So there is always progress, but indeed, it is not easy to keep not only yourself, but also your team motivated. That's one of the biggest challenges, which is part of the startup venture. The other part, which is quite challenging, is to make sure that you keep your focus. So the vision and the mission are important parts in this. You have to have an idea where we are headed, what is our North Star, and what do we want to succeed in within the X years. And focus is quite important, indeed. And it's very easy to lose your focus, especially in the beginning years. We saw a lot of incoming sales leads, because we started quite early with marketing the technology, all kinds of applications from 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers to Zeppelin to submarines, marines, wind turbines, all kinds of incoming sales leads, which also need motors or generators. But if you shoot on everything that moves, then you basically shoot nothing. So that's a very big challenge in any year, basically, to keep your focus, not only for yourself, but also for your team.
I mean, how big is your team now?
Now we are around 45 people.
Nice.
So that's about 35 people at Traxel and around 10 people at Axel. But it's growing quite quickly. So by the end of the year, there will be probably more than 50.
Nice. New challenge. Well, okay. Tell me, what over the last 7-8 years, what has been the most challenging year and why?
Over the last 7 years, it is, I think, keeping the focus. Also, the recruitment part. It has not been easy to find the right engineers. To give you one example, out of 45 people, we have almost 20 nationalities. So here in Belgium, it was just not possible to find the engineers with the right skills. So we had to develop processes to acquire people from other countries everywhere in the world and to make them work together, preferably physically, of course, because this is hardware. In software, it's easier to do it digitally or from home. Here we need the people in the space, in the workshop, to work together on the hardware part.
So COVID must have hit you pretty hard then in the year of COVID.
Although it's still R&D, so we were not doing any manufacturing or something, because there the supply chains were completely disrupted by COVID. In R&D, you don't need that many parts. Keep on working on the prototyping, so that was quite okay. Still, certain months, only the operational people who were actually working on the motors could be here. All the others could not be here, so that was already quite disruptive for us, which is a company who is basically mainly location-based. So most of the people actually work here on site.
So tell me, you said there at the beginning that you've got 2 other co-founders. So you have 3 co-founders in the business.
3, yeah.
A lot of the participants of the show that come on, they tell me about their co-founder being like their partner. It's a partnership. It's like a marriage. How is a marriage when it's in 3? How do you make that work when it's in 3? Different people, different ways of thinking, different ways of working, different emotions. How does it work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We are indeed 3 very different personalities, although our capabilities and skills are very compatible. And I think that's one of the most important parts, of course, if you constitute a founding team, is that the skills are compatible. You often see like co-founding teams with 4 or 5 of the same engineers from the same college, for instance. It's a bit more risky, I think. We come from different environments. I'm more like a marketing business guy. Peter is a real technological guy, while Kester, the third co-founder, is coming more from the venture capital side, financial and legal part. So it's very compatible. Nevertheless, communication is important. If you are coming from a completely different backgrounds and you are different personalities, then you have to learn to communicate better. So how we deal with it, we have very often founders meetings, and then we also have meetings that we do with the management teams here to make sure that we are aligned on the vision, on the next steps for the next 6 months and so on, and also on the management style for the two companies that we are managing here. So that's very important. I do think, of course, we do have also similarities. So we are all three quite rational thinking people. We are critical thinkers, not too emotional. So that also probably helps in making sure that our communication is going well.
Are you all the same nationality?
Yeah, we are all three from the neighborhood. So yeah, that's we are locals, yeah, local Belgians, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me, you were saying there about communication. Give me 3 tips for our listeners. 3 tips of how to be a better communicator over your time working as a leader, a founder. What have you found out which creates the best type of communication? 3 tips.
I think being honest with yourself is one good thing. Try to understand yourself. What are you good at? Be clear about that, not only for yourself, but also towards your co-founders or the others. Make sure, in our case, we also had to, or we chose to let our daughter companies or subsidiaries be managed by management team. So we found a CEO of Traxel, for instance, which is coming from the field. So you have to be able to let loose the responsibilities and make sure that these responsibilities can be done by people who are better at the particular thing. Like management is also an art by itself. That's one thing. So be clear, be honest with yourself that you have your good points and you have your bad points, of course. Try to stick to your the skills that you're good at, and that's one part. Another thing is regularly sit together. Although you have different personalities, it means that you have to even communicate even more. So it means very often every week do meetings, but not only professionally, also non-professionally, for instance. Talk about other things besides work, that you get this connection, not only professionally, but also more informal. So what we often do as a co-founding team is that we go eat together sometimes with our partners included, that we talk about other things besides work. So that gives a bit more respect for each other, that is not only focused on the professional parts. So that's 2 things. What's the third thing is, I don't have an immediate idea about the third tip. There are probably many.
Is there a skill of being able to explain something quite difficult? What you do is very difficult. Is there a skill of being able to explain something quite difficult in simple terms for people, especially if you're in marketing, for people to understand what you're doing?
Yeah, that's indeed a skill which is very important if you want to convince not only investors, potential customers, but also potential employees, is that you can simplify the very complex technology what you are working on. And that's indeed, you need somebody in the company who's able to build the value proposition, which is also a continuously improving thing. So it's, if you look at the investment decks that we built in the very beginning, these are quite cumbersome, sometimes very difficult for ourselves to understand. This is something that gets better over time, because you also become start to understand it much better. And it's quite known, if you deeply understand something which is complex, then you can basically also explain it to a 12-year-old, and that makes a difference. And it's a process. Year after year, you get better at that. But it is extremely important, because if you're not able to explain not only the technology, but also how the future looks like for you and the company, then you are not able to convince investors, for instance. And without investor money, you don't hire engineers, and without engineers, you cannot build anything. So a very underestimated skill which is critical to get where you want to be.
Emily, I'm going to ask you two more of a personal nature questions. First question, you said at the beginning there about photography. What kind of skills, what have you learned from photography, which you are able to use in your business right now? In your way of thinking, is it the way you look at things? Is it the way you kind of conceptualize things? How has photography helped you?
For me personally, I think having done this hobby, or it was semi-professional, I think it really forces you to indeed train your plasticity of your brains, I think. So you start to think about things from different perspectives, and that has helped me, I think, to also be a bit more creative in the marketing aspect here in the startup business. So it's basically training your brain, experimenting. In photography, it is also very important to do a lot of trial and error, and trial and error is very important in the startup world because you can never be sure of something until you have tried it. So without trial and error, there is basically no innovation. And without error, there is no trial and error. So error is, or failure is also a very important part of not only photography, but also of the startup world. So for me, that was a no-brainer basically, because it was basically integrated in my system to try things out and see what works and what doesn't work, and then move on with actually what works.
And I guess not to let it deflate you. Yeah, you know, if it's a failure, if it's an error, it's something that you can learn from and move on and iterate. Tell me, in regards to your career, if you were to go back to the beginning of your career when you started your first startup, what would you want to know? What would you give yourself? What kind of information would you give yourself, which you now know, which you most definitely didn't know then?
Well, my first 10 years was more in the corporate world. So I didn't have many examples in my family or in my neighborhood around entrepreneurship. If I would go back then with what I know today is, I would say, okay, make sure that you choose your friends wisely, because as you also probably know, if you surround yourself with certain kind of people, you will extract what they know, you will grow together. So I would definitely say, okay, be a bit more ambitious from that side in terms of being picky, focus more on entrepreneurial friends, because in the core, I am an entrepreneur, but the first 10 years I didn't know it of myself, basically. Choose your friends wisely is, I think, a good example. And if I would be able to go back, I would just say, okay, investigate more what I am intrinsically interested in, what I'm curious about. I would not say, okay, follow your passion, because that's something that scares you off. What's your passion? But if you just look at what you are curious about, then you can use that as a pathway to get where you want to be. And that's something which is valid for everybody, I think. Just don't follow the path that you think that others greatest for you, because if you don't have a plan for yourself, then you just follow somebody else's plan, and very likely that's not the most ideal plan for you particularly, of course. So be blunt in investigating your own vision, your own potential plan, and do some trial and error around it. What I would also advise to younger people is to actually indeed do more trial and error. You have to see your life a bit as an R&D, research and development trajectory. Try things out, try to investigate what teases me, what is actually my potential interest, am I potentially good at, and you can only investigate and find it out if you try things, basically.
Amazing.
So that's the advice that I would give myself also. Try more things, and then it will go much faster to investigate and to find out what I am good at, what I like to do.
Amazing. Dan, I think that's a very good way to finish this conversation today. Thank you very much for coming on, telling us everything that you're doing, and for letting me pick your brain a little bit for our audience. It's been great.
Yeah, my pleasure.